In 1992, there were some internal debates within the Wolfenstein 3D dev team about whether or not their reboot of Castle Wolfenstein would be a stealth game like its predecessor. Features like a stealth AI system, movable bodies, and swappable uniforms were implemented but scrapped to simplify and speed up the game. Meanwhile, other debates had them ramp up the graphic elements and touchy subjects instead. The Nazi enemies bled red blood and exploded into gore. The final boss was Adolf Hitler himself, and at some point the decision was made to stamp a Jewish last name onto our hero. With this bit of a narrative hint, Blazkowicz's escape from Castle Wolfenstein is painted less as a regular World War II military operation, and more of a cathartic act of revenge against Nazism itself. But a campy one, at that. Tempering the real-life death of millions are, sci-fi and fantasy enemies speckled right next door to the historical ones. So it's surprising that Machinegames' industrial diesel punk and kind of post-apocalyptic spin on the franchise, one that doesn't even include a Castle Wolfenstein, still stays true to the spirit of the originals. After all, the original Wolfenstein was originally a stealth game. The difficulty of balancing stealth game features against shooter features was a struggle for id during the 90s, and it's become an uncomfortable gene for the new team to be inheriting, but hey, they're doing their best. Machinegames does what Machinegame does, making some lovingly animated machines, while also trying to strike their usual balance between shooting, stealthing, and a well-thought-out first-person narrative adventure. And while having the best storytelling in the seemingly dying genre of Half-Life clones is working out well enough for them right now, I wonder if the momentum is going to last into whatever franchise their core team tackles after Wolfenstein. I remember my review being mixed but reluctantly leaning towards positive for the previous game in the series, where absolutely 10 out of 10 fantastic writing, music, and acting had to stack up against combat and level design that was fine at best, only serviceable at most, and either way deliberately unoriginal. I can't help but feel that for a lot of the game's missions, the cutscene guys missed a memo from the level design guys about how much of a stealth game the team was making, leading to situations like this scene where BJ Blazkowicz is brazenly swinging off the rope of a crashing spaceship through the window of a distant building, complete with some astronomically unlucky Nazi officer breaking his fall, only for you to figure out through trial and error that you're kind of supposed to pitter-patter behind this little bit of cover for minutes at a time, because you're actually a super fragile stealth game character who got stuck in an action game situation. In interviews with story director Jens Mathies, he describes Machinegames as if there are two different departments focusing on story and gameplay respectively, and while diligent management of the two explains why generally every scene in both new Wolfensteins feels important, whether you're playing or watching them, it also explains why generally every fifth or sixth room in both new Wolfensteins feels like the game and the story are both suddenly stopping in their tracks. In the New Order, it was rooms like those BJ crashes into after swinging in on the ropes. A few minutes of patient stop-and-pop headshotting, taught via 3 or 4 fairly forgiving deaths, was tolerable but annoying after hours of much smoother sailing through the stealth and sprinting from earlier rooms. But in the new Colossus, those rooms of forced combat are not annoying. They're genuinely frustrating. To the point where I would sooner recommend console players wait for a big patch or just plain bump it up to easy mode and swallow your pride. I made the mistake of doing my first playthrough of this game on a controller, and I have rarely seen a game's default normal mode be more mislabeled. I mean, look at this! The room is a wide-open panopticon, and since your wood panels are destructible, you have no cover from the sheer density of hit-scan bullets getting stamped all over the place. Oh, fine, sure, throw in a couple bullet sponges, that's what the section needs, sure. You know, after a few minutes of this, I started to wonder, are you supposed to die here? Are you supposed to run away? Is this just me sticking around for a scripted chase scene or something? Turns out no, you just gotta power through it and kill all these guys, and on normal mode with an Xbox controller, this one room took me an hour to clear. On mouse and keyboard it took me 10 minutes, and I have never seen such a discrepancy between the two controller methods before. Maybe I should be swapping them in and out more often. Anyways, you know, I usually swear against buying AAA PC ports at launch, but unless they labeled the PC game difficulty modes different from the console difficulty modes, just go with the PC version. I mean, you're gonna want to be aiming with that mouse anyway. It's worth the trouble. Even with my sheer luck, as some of the explosions didn't look right, I was okay. The Machinegames reboot of Wolfenstein is a careful balancing act between exceeding expectations on one end and simply meeting them on the other. When most of the thrill of playing them is in watching the next cutscene, it inevitably makes the intermission of pointing and clicking on bad guys on the way feel protracted. Every moment's gotta count, and though Wolfenstein yearns to make the most of every moment, the only real sore spots there are those occasional gauntlets of wave-based enemy defense. But even the smoother treks to the other side of these levels, the basic 2-lane stealth or shooty tunnels with officers checkpointing every 3 or 4 bad guys, has been stilted towards unfairness, thanks to some new stealth rules for the sequel. Enemies can now discover bodies, and that raises a half alert of heightened reaction times and a wider detection radius without a lot of feedback telegraphing that to the player. Meanwhile, our new throwing hatchets, instead of throwing knives, seem to have what... It just feels like a 10% chance to dice roll a miss based on what pixel of armor your heavy trajectory curve happens to land on. Despite the fact that enemies can discover bodies, players can't hide bodies, and I wonder if that's because of the same problem id faced in 1992, where such a playstyle would complicate and slow things down too much. And I think Blasco's newfound dependency on stealth is what is ironically mucking things up for Wolfenstein nowadays. On normal difficulty, BJ's health model does resemble that of a stealth game character. Just one enemy that you might have forgotten about in the pile of enemies you'll shoot through can absolutely chew you up even at full health. And the danger of that possibility creates the kind of slow-paced, high-risk, cautious tactical play that's just not conducive for an FPS where this much time is spent in open, exposed combat where heavy metal and flashing lights just encourage you to play dangerously. When I demoed this game at Gamescom, one of the developers was there to warn us that they hadn't yet finished fine-tuning the difficulty. That was about 2 months before launch, and it seems like they never did get around to finishing it. Of course, I can't personally speak on the actual dev process, nor the flexibility of id Tech 6's game logic, but it's disheartening that most of my gameplay gripes here seem to be coming from factors that I'd expect to be easily patchable. Things that are usually soft-coded variables like the AI's damage values, their spotting times, and also map design factors like enemy placements aren't exactly core issues with the core game, but rather just the levels they made for it and the settings they tuned their difficulty at. Because it looks better, it sounds better, it feels better than the previous game. We've got this cool new animation system where your character procedurally moves their first-person arms out of the way of walls. Oh wow! You get knocked down from grenades and your dude can automatically kind of cram the barrel of their gun through tiny holes and such. It's not exactly polished here, but I have no doubt that this tech is going to make the next Bethesda id shooters feel even better. Enigma codes actually do stuff this time. The upgrade system is totally fine. There's none of that nonsense where the game wants you to shoot 3 enemies while crouch sliding towards them. Probably the furthest out of my way I went to farm some BJ upgrades was a chapter spent shooting bad guys with hatchets instead of bullets so that I could carry more hatchets. It's about as far-fetched as needing to kill enemies while crouch sliding to make your BJs faster, but it's way less elaborate and just way less trouble to knock this off the list. It's no longer a situational chore to be ticking those boxes, but then again, when one of them has you simply shoot enemies in the head for a quota, I have to wonder how necessary such a system really is. One last weird neutral observation, there's no doors in the sequel. They, took out doors for some reason. Anyways, we've also got an improved standard of gunplay from the last game, which means the new Colossus is basically now the gold standard in weapon animation and sound. The shotgun is just pure fireworks, and despite all of the soft-coded design issues, the core tech of the stealth gameplay of New Colossus isn't even that bad, letting me make stealth routes during my second playthrough that looked just like the gamified version of Inglourious Bastards that seems like the original vision behind this stuff. Thing is, during your first time through, you're simply not going to have the tools nor the experience to make use of the routes and tactics that the developers seemingly demand out of you. And I say demand because we're really going back about 13 years in terms of how much player error is tolerated here, even when just figuring out where to go. This game's rooms are dark, there is no flashlight, and exits are often tiny holes or windows. I wouldn't say it's flat out bad level design, but it is kinda triggering flashbacks of getting stuck in old fan-made Half-Life levels. To be fair, I don't think the new Colossus is that much of a step back from the previous game, but well, definitely at least a slight one. But I think I need to clarify something. I have ended up loving both of these games, but more because of how much more exciting they are than how excellent they are. Neither are perfect games by any stretch, but they are still these inspired explosions of talent from a team who's clearly having fun making them. This team is turning BJ Blazkowicz into one of the most well-written characters in gaming history, and that is really damn exciting to watch. So, this video is probably sounding like a protracted list of nitpicks just because the new Colossus is more of a side-grade sequel than a straight upgrade. The general look and feel of things has gotten better, but the elegance of how well it's all laid out is much messier, and so much of that simply has to do with difficulty. There was a bit of relief when I loaded up the previous game and confirmed I wasn't crazy. Halfway through the old moon-base level, I suddenly saw two officers standing within view of each other. Both could be sniped within the same sightline, and that stuff just doesn't happen in the sequel. And unfortunately, the other subtle design decisions just mean that levels don't seem to flow as gracefully from one into the other. On top of those wonky new stealth rules, which are probably just going to look like unpredictable inconsistency to a lot of players, there's also the pure playtest-dependent science of figuring out how many health and ammo packs to put around which kinds of enemies. That's what I suspect is lacking from a lot of the rooms I had problems with. It's a science that Valve perfected many years ago, and you can tell by playing that perfectly play-tested pacing polish is not as high a priority for Machinegames. What is, though, are their storytelling tricks. Wolfenstein: The New Order was developed by veterans of Starbreeze Studio, who, up until 2004, had faced almost a decade of legal troubles and canceled projects that didn't exactly result in blockbuster games. This all changed when they got a job to make a Chronicles of Riddick tie-in game. Since Vin Diesel is a big dorky nerd who wanted to make sure his own video games weren't going to be garbage, he made the unconventional decision to involve himself in his own movie's game and give the team a deadline they could actually work with. These were the conditions needed to finally exploit the talents of developers like Jens Mathies, Jörg Gustafsson, and Magnus Hagedal, I think, to continue collaborating on similarly narrative-heavy first-person sneak-and-shooties up until Syndicate, when conflicts with the publisher boiled over, and that core first-person dev team split off and tried to do their own thing elsewhere. That opportunity arose when Bethesda purchased id Software's properties and no one else had taken up Wolfenstein yet, and with much of the team having grown up modding id's games, there was a lot of excitement to be working on this project. And you can tell, the narrative direction in these games is so goddamn confident, and in terms of raw technical execution, the sequel is on a level even higher than the first game. For starters, there's no more awkward transitions in and out of cutscenes. Many of the cutscenes employ a film editing technique called eye tracing to help ease the viewer's perspective through the harsh cuts away from cutscene to gameplay. Notice how our eyes are misdirected towards the path ahead, causing this jump gag to be more effective and convey a sense of immersive irony. Notice how many vocal pauses were added to this conversation to keep it in pace with the player's movement. It's all a damn fine example of what unique elements gameplay can do to spice up storytelling. And this aspect of the game is weirdly helped and not hindered by new Wolfenstein's focus on stealth. Waiting around in menus to read about world building and flavor text doesn't exactly feel like a break in the action when you're waiting around anyway for guards to turn their backs. But the quieter rooms of Wolfenstein help the game seamlessly merge thoughtful environmental storytelling with the violence, not unlike the Half-Lifes that inspired it, punctuating moments of over-the-top, cathartic ultra-violence next to entire levels of non-violent exploration. When they were doing interviews about the previous game, Mathias spoke proudly about how excited he was creating the train car scene, where the team knew they had a point A on one side of the train with some coffee machines, and a point B on the other side of the train with Anya's cabin. But they needed some obstacles to put between the two to make a video game level out of it. It's easy to imagine a forced stealth sequence of quietly sneaking through a train car full of containers, but what Mathies decided to do instead was this interactive cutscene segment fleshing out a new villain. In the sequel, we have a similar scene, a point A, a point B, and the truly ridiculous surprise that the obstacle in the way is an empty walking simulator house full of about as many torn-out diary pages as old empty walking simulator houses tend to have. This whole segment precedes what's like my favorite half hour since the Halloween party. Stilts, please.
Is this real?
I don't know when I stopped gasping and started laughing in this scene. I don't know if I ever stopped laughing at this scene. This is incredibly surreal. This kind of avant-garde, self-aware, self-parodying, but self-congratulating scenario. The whole situation is just video games. It helps that this not too subtly reinforces the game's oddball theme of characters persisting through decapitation, which happens 3 times and is subverted when the villain isn't even given the honor. There's also the recurring theme of BJ's movement and abilities being changed as his body changes. 3 times, from the wheelchair to the exoskeleton to the super soldier, each one fundamentally changing the player's movement and health resources. I wonder if the game's, technical player body shadow model features were intended to fold into these story themes somehow? The weirdest theme of it all, though, is BJ's own Oedipal complex. In the Greek tragedy of Oedipus Rex, Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother. In Wolfenstein 2, The New Colossus, BJ Blazkowicz literally kills his father. There's no questions about that, it just happens right in front of our faces. But he metaphorically marries his mother, proposing to a Polish woman with a Jewish name who looks and talks an awful lot like his Polish Jewish mother. There's a lot of talk about a third game coming out, so in what I expect to be the Blazkowicz trilogy of Machinegames Wolfenstein games, the first half of The New Colossus is totally Empire Strikes Back. It's a more personal story about the family connections between the people at the head of the Empire and the Resistance than it is about the war itself, which is actually really damn far off the note they ended the first game on.
In a beautiful day.
Whatever the hell happens to the second half of Colossus illustrates what a departure in tone it is from the first game. Once BJ's past is coughed up, his head is lopped off, and a repetitive and, to be truthful, kind of uneventful second half has us going through a story that also suddenly gets kind of tone deaf. See, what I miss most about the previous game, and what seems to fly down the furnace with BJ's head halfway through the second game, is the tragedy of this dystopia and of this character. Don't forget that Wolfenstein has usually been more about fighting Nazis specifically than just fighting World War II, and the previous game is one of the only video games to ever breach the topic of the Holocaust. There was a video game concentration camp level, and somehow the developers managed to avoid a hugely damaging controversy over it. And I think the reason why is that it was just damn good, or at least it was just way more damn good than people expected it to come out as. It wasn't exactly what I'd call respectful, but it was still an incredibly cathartic revenge fantasy against a reminder that the Holocaust actually happened. And I bet the reason the team was able to get away with that was through a lot of research, a lot of consultation, a lot of editing and proofreading, but also the luck of having more of a cultural home field advantage. Which brings up my favorite piece of writing advice from pretty much anyone. Write what you know. Machinegames is a Swedish studio staffed by a multinational team from all over Europe, and their last game was about alternate European history rooted in a distinctly European event. And when comparing their effort at writing on distinctly American events, you can really see the hemisphere of esoteric cultural facts in the way. The kind of distance that wasn't there when they were tackling European touchstones like the Holocaust. So, hear me out here. I learned a lesson when visiting Germany and drinking through some filthy conversations over there. Believe it or not, apparently Hitler jokes are fair game and common, but they have the claim on those. I do believe that smart funny jokes can be made about taboo topics, but pulling that off usually takes the kind of first-hand know-how that comes from, well, making sure to write what you know. So for game teams tackling heavy subject matters, consultation with the people who know about those subject matters would be the smart thing to do. In other words, get the black people to write the black jokes. Get the Jewish people to write the Jew jokes. And if for some reason at some point in your life you find yourself working on a Wolfenstein game that needs a couple Hitler jokes, maybe consult a German first. Actually, no, let's give him to the Austrian. Fun fact, in case in point, Set Roth's voice actor is Jewish as hell. Born in Ukraine and raised in Israel. All that Yiddish that Seth Roth just throws into his lines was actually improvised by the voice actor in the studio. Oh boy. That actually wasn't his first time playing this kind of role. After talking with some German fans about the game, I learned that the Liesel movie used in promotions is actually a parody of an infamously sappy German movie genre from the 60s. The game's posters evoke German wordplay and irony. Guess what rhymes with a childhood slang for, well, another word for scheisse. Then there's the Hitler scene. The king of the Nazis shows up, and suddenly I feel like a million Hitler jokes are passing over my head by the second. In an attempt to make this guy as pathetic, reviling, and disgusting as possible, they have him puking and pissing all over the place, which seemed to come straight out of left field, until a German friend pointed me to a German article from a German newspaper about how Hitler's health was, not that healthy at all. So the scene gets both jobs done. Not only is Hitler the most repulsive creature in this game, but it's actually grounded in a kind of cultural caricature of the person. The game's detail and its research has created an interesting love-hate relationship in Germany, where fans love how many little details and esoteric facts it gets right about German language and culture and history, while also hating that it's having to censor that history at the same time.
Denn ein Idiot! No, mein Führer, sind Sie ein verkleideter Schurke, ein Jude? Ein verräterischer Jude! No, mein Führer, I'm I'm from Arizona.
Sind Sie denn ein Idiot?
Nein, mein Kanzler.
Sind Sie ein verkleideter Schurke? Ein Verräter? Ein niederträchtiger Verräter!
Nein, mein Kanzler. Ich komme aus Arizona.
Anyways, I think that's the kind of cultural backbone and the kind of research and consultation that's missing once the first half of the game wraps up BJ's story and is just kind of left with the story of the awkwardly implemented American setting. The setting goes sorely underutilized. So, we're in the early 60s, which primes the story for the civil rights movement, and a big theme involves B.J. Blazkowicz using the disparate factions that were dividing America's political issues at the time so that they can all team up against a common enemy, and holy shit, what a cathartic-ass fantasy that'd be. I am sure that a lot of us could use a shot of that right about now, so what do they do with that? Well, you got angry black people from the big city. They're kind of modeled after the Black Panthers, but it's never made explicit, hinting at a black revolutionary front that we never really see or get a good definition of. And one important question that I really feel should have been addressed here regarding this skyscraper society they have set up. What do they eat? Then there's Horton and his good people.
You've got a lot of good people here.
Actually, he's just got two good people, and I don't really get what kind of exaggerated historical demographic these guys are supposed to be representing. They're like isolationist, anti-war, communist hippies or something, even though their leader is this Southern Baptist preacher who doesn't really fit either stereotype. I feel like this is the result of some straight weirdness happening during Wolfenstein's World War II timeline split. I mean, it could happen in a universe this ridiculous. Or it could be the result of writers who don't have a super strong background in American voting demographics circa 50 years ago. The other big theme of bigoted Americans happily welcoming their new Nazi overlords feels prematurely snipped as well. Especially after some incendiary marketing from Bethesda might have riled people up into expecting harsher indictments of modern-day bigotry. The game was written in 2014, before comparisons with Nazis became a relevant talking point in the news again, and I can't help but feel like the game ended up pulling a lot of its punches in an attempt to offend inflammatory Americans less. For example, where's the KKK? You got characters yelling about how the Ku Klux Klan is in power. It's a shocking, ridiculous situation that somehow still fits the tone of the universe, but all you see are two civilian NPC Klansmen get just as oppressed by their Nazi overlords as everyone else. I found just one Klansman in the game besides those two, and it was a nameless mook enemy in an optional side mission. You find notes about these guys all over the place. They're constantly told but not shown, like the whole implied revolution in general. Apparently, slavery's been reinstated by the Nazis. That's a shocking, ridiculous moment that somehow fits the tone of this universe, but you never really take a trip to explore the result of that either. But in the last game, they went there. Oh, they went there. The Nazis were a genuine, real-ass Nazi threat. The story was a genuine tragedy, and the black comedy that made it palatable came from something video games have always done but rarely embraced: the funny and empowering juxtaposition between cutscenes and gameplay. Though you might have laughed in the previous game, the characters never cracked jokes.
I often wonder what kind of a god would sanction suffering such as this, and I question myself whether my faith is misplaced.
Maybe he's testing us.
Well, Egyptian, if he is testing us, we are failing gloriously.
No! What the hell is that thing?
This is not the thing, Simpson. This is not the thing. This is the body of a squirrel monkey and the head of my beloved Siamese kid. Shoshana, look at you. He's not gonna do anything to you. He's a good Yingler.
Get that thing away from me!
Yeah, my pet. Hop up. Oh, fie.
On the other hand, I made a frowny face in my notebook every time Wolfenstein 2 did a poop joke. In the lightening of the tone and the softening of the shock, the Nazis in the new Colossus have become something else as well. Their atrocities aren't explored, and the nightmares of the previous game are forgotten. The Nazis here are something much less threatening. Propped up by the Oedipus analogy, they are more akin to your parents. They disapprove of who you're dating and what you're eating. They're angry, they're strict, they're obsessed with cleanliness and order. They are the abstract embodiment of authoritarianism. They certainly are Nazis, all right, but now they seem a notch closer to Iron Sky Nazis instead of Inglorious Bastards Nazis. Once it's all wrapped up and done with, we get this shrill screamo cover of Twisted Sister. I'm not a fan. I mean, not of the game's cover. Twisted Sister's fine. They're fun. They're rowdy, but Twisted Sister? Now everything just seems petty. I want to know how the rousing battle cry for this kind of nasty business, where we're killing hundreds of human beings at a time, liberating concentration camps, and executing military leaders on television, winds up at Twisted Sister. I think it's because now the Nazis are just your parents.
All right, mister, what do you think you're doing? I want you to straighten up this area now! You are a disgusting slob! Stand up straight! Tuck in that shirt! Adjust that belt buckle! Tie those shoes! Twisted Sister! What is that? Wipe that smile off your face. Do you understand? What is that? A Twisted Sister pin on your uniform? What kind of a man are you? You're worthless and weak. You do nothing. You are nothing. You sit in here all day and play that sick, repulsive, electric twanger. I carried an M16